Hi everyone, Corey Barker here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now. Hit the like button, and I hope you enjoy this. Here I am taking inspiration from Hollywood yet again. The Black Adam trailer was released earlier this week, or a teaser rather, and it had a really cool 3D text effect. I just had to give it a go using Photoshop and Dimension combined to create this amazing result here. And now I'm going to show you how to do it step by step. Check it out. Enjoy. All right, so first we are here in Photoshop, and here's where we're going to create the 3D objects that we're going to then bring into Dimension. So because it's still Photoshop, we need to create our own custom extrusion and some 3D objects like that. So we need to just create the basic 3D element here, and then we're going to export it and take it into Dimension and make it look really, really cool. Now you'll notice I've already gone ahead and created pretty much the entire logo element here for the sake of time. But what I did here was use the font called Euro Style and just created a stacked version of the text. But then I converted it to a shape layer, and then went ahead and added the lightning bolt element here on the side of the A, like it is in the actual teaser trailer. So now we're ready to go ahead and convert this to 3D again here in Photoshop. So I'm going to bring out my layers panel here. You'll notice this is in fact a shape layer. So it's got nice clean vector edges. So it's going to give us a very clean 3D extrusion. So what we need to do is simply go up here to the 3D menu, and I'm going to choose new 3D. Actually, I want to select the paths, and we want to get 3D extrusion from selected path. There we go. And it's going to go and get that object extruded, as you see right there. And we're going to go ahead and open up your 3D panel and your properties panel. Need both. And we're going to go and grab the current view, which is the camera we're looking at this object. And if you just use your 3D orbit tool, you can click and drag and move around and see the element in 3D space. Now that extrusion is a bit much, so let's go into our shape object. And in the properties panel, we're going to dial down that extrusion depth quite a bit. We can still adjust this in Dimension, but I'm just going to go ahead and dial this down a little bit for the sake of looks here. And let's go ahead and hit default camera again, bring it back to the front view. Now I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, because what we want to do here is apply a bevel, a custom bevel, so that we have this kind of dual, like multi-layer text effect going on. So we're going to go over here and select the shape object again in the 3D panel. And over here in the properties panel, we're going to go over to the third tab right here at the top, which is the cap settings on the object right there. And you'll see that we've got the bevel settings and everything right here. So I'm going to start by setting the bevel amount. Let's go ahead and select that. I'm going to set that to 20. You'll see it gives me a good amount of bevel on the object there. But I don't just want it to be a standard 45-degree angle bevel. I want to make it a little bit more stylized than that. So I'm going to go over here and click on the contour menu here. Just click directly on the icon, and it will open up the contour editor. Now here I'm going to add a couple of control points here. And what this does is modify the profile, basically, of your bevel. Right now it's at a 45-degree angle, and that's representative of this diagonal line here. But by adding control points, I'm going to move these objects around, and we could get a nice, smooth edge here, but we want to get this rather harsh. So I'm going to select these control points and click on corner down here at the bottom. And it's going to give me a much more angular version of it there. And that's all we're doing here, is just changing this. Instead of a straight 45-degree line, we're breaking it up so it's got several angles here. And when I click OK here, we're going to see how that results on the object itself. We get this kind of multi-layer thing going on, and that's looking pretty good. Now again, you can go back in there and adjust this if you want. Now remember though, when you make these changes and you export it to bring it into Dimension, those changes are fixed. So certain things like the bevel settings we've adjusted here won't be able to adjust those in Dimension. But you will be able to save this file so you can re-export it in the event you need to. So that we've got that. Text is extruded. We've got the various bevel elements. Everything's looking really good there. So now we are ready to go ahead and export it into a format that we can bring it into Dimension. We'll zoom back out here. So again, this part of the Photoshop segment of it in the beginning is very quick. We're just extruding the object and then exporting it, and then we're going to do all the really cool stuff in Dimension, and then we're going to render it. Then we're going to come back into Photoshop and do some finishing touches just to give the overall design a finished, polished look, if you will. All right, so now let's go to the 3D menu. And again, make sure you have that 3D layer selected. We're going to go to the 3D menu, go down here to Export 3D Layer. And we're going to do it as a wavefront OBJ file, and it's okay. We'll go ahead. Let's actually size it down a little bit. I'm going to bring it down to 1200 on the X there, and I'll automatically adjust the others. And we'll go ahead and click OK. And I'm just going to, I always like to save a new folder or create a new folder, because sometimes it'll export various support files that you don't necessarily need, but can create a bit of clutter on your desktop. So we'll just call this Black Adam main, create, and we'll go ahead and click save there. And let's go ahead and minimize that for now. Let's go ahead and in our folder here, and we'll see that we've got, so there are those, random support files that are part of that 3D object. But the main one we're concerned about here is this start.obj file, and that is the 3D object that we have here. You can actually navigate around in 3D here in preview mode. How cool is that? But anyway, all right, so now we've got the object ready, exported. Let's jump into Dimension and start making it look really cool. All right, so now we are here in Adobe Dimension. I'm going to go ahead and create a new document. And over here, I'm going to actually make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it 2,000 pixels wide, but let's go with 1,300 pixels tall. And we'll fit it in the view there. There we go. Now I'm also going to change my background color. I don't want it to be that default white. I actually want it to be just solid black, so we're going to make that there. So to select environment and go to the background swatch here, and there you go. Now remember, when you're navigating in a Dimension document, remember the keyboard shortcuts 1, 2, and 3. 1 turns on the orbit camera. Click and drag moves it around like that. 2 is the pan camera, and number 3 is the zoom in and out. Now actually I use my mouse scroll wheel to zoom in and out that way. Makes it a lot easier, but 1 and 2 are very critical, so they can allow you to navigate around the scene and around your objects. So now let's go ahead and import our model that we created in Photoshop. So we're going to go to the File menu, go down here, go to Import 3D Model. And it's just on my desktop here. Remember, we named the folder Black Adam Main. So there is my start.obj file. We'll go and click Open. Now, depending on how big you create objects in Photoshop, they'll come in rather large, as you can see here in Dimension. Now, one keyboard or little shortcut here is if you go in the upper right corner in this frame selection button here, just click that, and it zooms out your object into the view there, and you can see it is pretty big. So let's go ahead and press the S key, and then we're going to just go ahead and scale this down a little bit, and then we'll press V. Activates the move tool, and I'm just going to use the axis tool here to nudge that up there like that. So it's hovering a good deal above the ground plane there, and that's important in just a minute. All right, so now I'm going to zoom in here and notice the extrusion of the object is still a little bit thicker than I want it to be. So again, I'm going to press S and go in here and just along the scale Z axis here. We're just going to make it a little bit thinner. And like that. There we go. All right. So now let's talk about textures. Now, you have a variety of textures in Dimension to play with in your starter assets here. If you go over to the left side panel here, and under the filter by, just click on this little icon here, you'll see that you've got a lot of standard textures. These all come with Dimension. These are really, really cool to play around with. They're very customizable in a lot of different ways. But the one I'm going to use here is actually one I found on Adobe Stock. Again, a massive library of customizable materials also available on Adobe Stock. But the one I'm going to use here is actually, I'm going to go into my my Creative Cloud library here, and I've got a collection of materials here I've gotten over the past several years. But there's this one called Steel Battered, and it's basically damaged metal, and that's exactly what we're going for on this particular look here. But now, before I apply it, I want to point out something here. When you import an object like this, and especially text like this, and you go and apply a texture to the object as a whole. Notice here in the scene panel, if I click and twirl down here, notice it's made up of the several elements that you remember seeing in Photoshop. You got the front inflation, the front bevel, and everything like that. It's broken down into those individual planes. If you apply universally a texture to the shape object out here like this, it will apply it, but you won't be able to manipulate it in the way that you need to. In fact, I'll just show you real quick. If I apply the steel batter directly to that shape, it'll apply it to all the planes of the object. But notice how it's stretching more on the extruded side of the text there. You can see it's picking up that light reflection there. But it's stretching that texture tremendously. And the front doesn't look so bad. We could scale it down a little bit, but it actually looks like it's supposed to. But it's really streaking on that side there. And if I go and try to scale it, you'll see it modifies not only that area, but also the areas on the front and the bevel and everything like that. So we don't really want to do it that way. So let's go back a couple steps there. Well, what we want to do is actually apply the texture to each individual plane so we can edit them separately. So we'll start with the front inflation. And again, I'm going to just double click and apply that battered texture. It should come in and look just fine. There we go. See that? And the same thing with the extrusion material. We'll just go ahead and apply that. Now I know this is an extra step, but when you get the renders you get out of dimension here, it's worth the few extra steps just to be able to get some really, really impressive results ultimately. And then we're going to go ahead and apply it to the extrusion material. And in those first two surfaces, the front face and the bevel, I don't necessarily need to adjust them, but obviously we need to adjust it to the side there. You can see how it's really stretching it. And what you want to do is actually go down here in the properties panel, and you'll see that we've got this repeat section here. The first thing you want to do is unlink it because it's stretching one dimension of the texture more than it is the other dimension, the X and Y. So we want to unlink that, so go ahead and uncheck that. And if you just use the scrubby slider and just dial this up a little bit, you'll see that it's really starting to compress the texture down a little bit. Now I'm actually going to set this to a very high number. We're going to go with about 20. You can see that's looking pretty good. It looks almost like its natural state. I'm going to dial up, or rather dial down the Y. Let's do a 0.5 on that one. And maybe even dial up the X a little bit more. And you can see how it's really starting to look normal. And that actually doesn't look bad. I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. But that gives you an idea of what you're dealing with when you're applying textures to a custom 3D object like this. Just keep that in mind. All right, so that's looking really good. So let's go ahead and establish our final camera view of the final scene here. So I'm actually going to move my camera around. Again, I'm using the 1 and 2 keys to rotate and adjust the position here. Now, one thing I want to do is actually change the lens of my camera at which we're looking at this. I'm going to go back into my scene panel here and go to select camera. And then here you'll see the field of view dial here. Now, the higher we go with the number, the much wider angle the lens gets. You can see it's further moving back in space there. I'm actually going to set this at a 55. And that's going to give us a little bit of a wide angle. And I'm just going to zoom in closer here a little bit and dial this. So we're getting a little bit of a tilt back a little bit there. There we go. And then we've got this environment light that's on it right now. And if I just rotate this around, you can see how that light behaves on the object. It's actually really kind of cool. See how it's behaving on that texture? How it's really responding to the little dents and little imperfections in there. But this light is way too bright. So we're going to actually dial that intensity down quite a bit there. And we're actually going to change the light in just a minute. But now that we've got the angle of view looking pretty good, I want to save it. So we're going to save this camera angle by going to this camera bookmark menu here. And I'm just going to click on that. And we'll click and save the view. We'll just call this... Actually, I've gotten in a habit where I just don't even name them anymore because I end up with like maybe a dozen views of an object when I get into a scene. You can take the time to label it, but I just get so in the zone sometimes that I just want to just keep going there. So, but what's important is that you save the view and that you can get back to it. All right, so again, now we're at the lighting. So we've got that default environment light on the object, but we want to add something more dramatic. I want to have a warm light, like a burning light coming in from underneath, and then we're going to have a little bit of a spotlight or a specular light source above it. And we're going to use objects to do that, illuminated objects. Very simply, I'm going to start going in. Let's go into the starter assets again. We're going into the models here. And I'm going to go down to the through the list here, and we're going to look for the disk right here. It's just a regular 3D disk there, and you'll see it by clicking on it, applies it to my scene. And you can see how big it is in relation to my object here, so we've got to really scale it up. Or maybe even scale our text down a little bit there. Maybe just go down a little bit that. And then we'll really scale this one up. We'll have to zoom in here. Remember those navigation tools. Again, very, very handy. So I'm scaling up that object now. So let's get it real nice and big. Move it forward here. I think I'm even going to stretch it this way a little bit more. Now, in order to have some light coming from this particular object, we're going to go into our materials again, into our starter assets. And at the very top of your standard materials list, you got this glowing property here. So go ahead and apply that, and it's default white. So essentially, it's illuminating white light right now. But I don't want it to be white. We want it to be a nice warm, like a fire underneath it or something. So we're going to go with a little bit more hot orange color here, something like this. That looks good. And then down here in the glow setting, you'll see it defaults at 500%, but we're going to go a little bit higher than that. Let's go with 700 on that percentage there. And that's going to give us some nice hot glow coming in from underneath. In fact, let's go back to our main camera view. And if we do a little bit of a test render here, you're going to start to see, aha, there we got a nice hot glow coming in from the bottom. So that's looking really good. So now let's go and add our other light source, because if you want to point out something here, actually get a little bit closer. Now remember, when this renders, it's not going to render the black background as part of it. It will be the object will be on a transparent background, so it'll be easier to work with in Photoshop. So move this up a little bit here. But if I start the render again, you'll see the light, the environment light is really bright. And it's not really the right light for the scene. So I'm actually going to stop that render for a second. So let's go to that environment light. And I'm going to jump over here to my assets panel. And let's go into this light section. And again, these are all standard lights that come with Dimension. I'm going to go in here and add this Studio Softbox down here. And you can see that gives me a much more dramatic look there. And if I rotate the light here a little bit, you see how it passes over, how cinematic that is. Look at that. If you could animate that. All right. I digress. Maybe someday they'll add animation to Dimension, but right now, that's still pretty cool. All right, a little intense. I'm going to dial down the intensity a little bit here, so we get we want that light to be pretty subtle, right above the text there. And if I go ahead and start the render again, you can see that's giving us a nice little bit of a glow coming in from above, but we're not getting any specular highlights from the above light. We're getting nice speculars, on the text from that bottom hot glow there, but we want to get some specular highlights coming in from the top there. So I did adjust my camera angle, so I'm going to save this view, and let's go back out. I'm going to zoom back out here, and you can see there's our big illuminated fiery object. But I'm actually going to go and use what's there. I'm going to select that disk element here in the scene panel. I'm going to press Command D. Control D if you're on Windows, and that's going to create a duplicate of that object. I'm going to press V again, and we're going to go ahead and just drag this up the Y-axis to keep it right above the element. Now, we want this to be a white light, of course, so we're going to go ahead and make that white light there. And this is where you're going to find something interesting. So I'm going to just push this up. Now, you'd think if you go and rotate the view here, you'll see that you've got this glowing object right above the text there. But if we go back to our camera view, we can see it right there. We're going to adjust that in a minute. But if I start the render, you're going to see that we're not really getting much of anything happening. You might think, where's the light from my text? It's not looking correct. And you can see it's actually reflecting the light from beneath and then bouncing it down. So that's not what we want. So if I start out the render here, you'll see. So you can see that's what it's doing there. So what's going on here is that it's not emitting the white light. It's actually emitting it upwards. It's only one side of the disk that actually emits the light. So what you need to do is actually, I'm going to press the R key and we'll click right on the object. And I'm just going to go ahead and use this axis thing and rotate this around. Maybe even give it a little bit of an angle there. And perhaps scale it a little bit. And we'll do something like that. And that looks good. All right, so now if I go back to that camera view and we start the render again, now we're getting some nice specular highlights on the top of that object there. But now they're considerably too bright because they're the same brightness as that the fire element below. So let's go down to that setting. Remember where we had changed the glow down here to 700? Let's drop that down to something like 300 and make it a little bit less. There we go. That's looking much better. So now I want to get this light, the hot glow underneath. I want to get that looking a little bit more intense there. So I'm going to go and I want it to cover more area. So I'm actually going to scale it this direction a little bit, maybe move it back a hair. And let's go back to that main view and maybe zoom in a little bit. I'm going to give a little bit more of an angle upward. And then let's start that render again and see what we're getting. Now remember, when it starts the render, it's going to be this real grainy look at first, and especially if you've got a lot of soft gradients in there and some really minute detail, it's going to start out really grainy like this, and as it progresses through the render, it's going to get nice and clean, and you're going to end up with a nice clean render at the end of it. So I think that's looking pretty good. So I'm actually going to tilt my view down here a little bit, maybe make a couple of minor other adjustments. Let me start that render again and see. That looks really good. All right. So now we're ready to go ahead and render the object. So we're going to go up here into the left side of the interface. Just go over here and click on the render tab. And it's very simple. We're going to go over here. Let's actually name it. We'll call it Black Adam Render 1. I'm going to go ahead and do it in high. I am on a MacBook Pro laptop, so this render, last time I did it, took a little less than an hour. So that's actually not bad considering the final result. But depends on the setting. I actually had it at high at the highest 16-bit setting, so that was going for full quality there, which is what I'm going to do here. But if you're just wanting to do a quick render, again, you can try a PNG or even change the quality setting here if you're not needing it to be super high res, if it's going to be for web use or something like that. But I am going to go ahead and do it as a high res render here and render it to my desktop. I'm just going to click the render button now. And I'm not going to make you wait, of course, through the entire render, but we are going to go ahead and jump ahead to the finished render so that we can take it into Photoshop and apply all the finishing effects. So let's jump ahead. All right, so here we are back in Photoshop with the final render, and I was way off on my estimate of the render time because there's no background and it's just the text. It only took about 20 minutes to render the full version here, so that didn't take nearly as long as I thought. If you had more elements in the background and other things in the environment, it certainly would have taken longer as considering all that. So didn't take long at all. Anyway, here we are in Photoshop. Now, the first thing I need to do, you remember it rendered it at 16-bit, so it get a much higher quality render there. But for the sake of compositing purposes, I'm going to go and convert this back to an 8-bit because I'm going to be adding a few effects that the bit depth kind of affects the some of the gradients and such like that. So we've gone ahead and changed that. Now what I want to do is add some effects to this. Now, if you look in the layers panel, you'll see that some additional layers that came with this document when it rendered out. Not only do we have the element, which if I turn the background layer off, you can see it is, in fact, isolated on its own layer. So you don't have to select it and extract it or anything like that. So we're back on our text element. What I want to do here is in the original trailer, of course, there was this lightning bolt that kind of went around the side of the A here, carving out the bolt. And that we're going to do here in Photoshop with just a few simple shapes and some layer styling. And we're going to add a few other atmospheric effects just to kind of finish it off. I'm going to add a few things that weren't necessarily in the trailer, but I'm going to add them because it just looks cool. First thing is, let's scale this down a little bit. I'm going to hold down my Option key and let's just scale this to the center. I filled the frame in dimensions so I could get it as big as I could in the render, but in the final composite, I am going to scale it down just a little bit here. And there we go. Okay. So first thing is, let's add that the lightning bolt element. Now that we're going to use a simple path here in Photoshop. I'm going to go up here at the very top of the layer and make a new blank layer. Let's put it outside that folder there. And I'm going to go over here and grab my pen tool. Now set the pen tool mode to path up here in the options bar. And I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit one more time. And we're just going to trace a path along the edge. It doesn't even have to be perfectly along the edge, just along the edge of this A here. I'm going to extend a little bit beyond the edge there because of the way we're going to apply our effect here. I'm going to drag this one down a little bit beyond that edge too. So we get it traced right along there. Now again, we have that empty layer selected. What I want to do now is go ahead and get my brush tool. And notice I've got this set to a simple, let's actually set the foreground color to white. And it's just a very simple, round, soft edge brush. In fact, if we go in here, it's just nothing fancy about it. Just it's a 30 pixel hardness set to 0 and all that. But you'll notice also, I do in fact have pen pressure turned on for the size. Now, you want to make sure this is on, even if you're not using a pressure-sensitive tablet. Do make sure that is turned on and you see it tapering in the ends like this. And what we're going to do with that is go over here to the Paths panel and go over here into the Path menu and go down here to Stroke Path. And we want to stroke it with the brush. Simulate pressure. This is why you wanted to keep that option checked on. Click OK. And then we get a kind of a glowing bolt going around the edge there. Now, we're going to give it a glow using layer styling. Now, for the sake of time, I've saved my layer style because it took me a few tries to get it dialed in, but I'll show you what it's made of here. But you can see I just apply that style, and it gives me a nice glow on that object. And what it's composed of is an inner glow and an outer glow. It gives me that effect there. In fact, if we go in here and look, you'll see here on the inner glow, it's just a yellow with a hard light, blend mode. Vary the size depending on the shape and everything like that. We've pretty much got the same thing going on in the outer glow. It's just that the yellows might be a little different color. Want to get a little bit, more orange on the outer glow part, so it gets a little bit more hotter glow there. But you can adjust that is the whole point here, and that's really cool. So for that, I'm going to go and click OK. Now the next thing I'm going to do is actually go into the filter menu and go down here and run a blur. Let's go to blur, Gaussian blur. About a 3 pixel blur works fine. That's good, okay. And there we have that. Now, this is looking pretty good. However, we would expect that bolt to be really casting some light along the the surface area of the D and the A here, especially since it's so close. So we're going to go ahead and make a new blank layer in the layers panel. Let's put it underneath that bolt layer. And over here, we're going to grab the gradient tool using a simple foreground to transparent gradient. And radial is the gradient style here. We're going to start right there and around the center area of that bolt and just drag out a gradient there. That's probably a little big, maybe a little bit smaller, but that's okay. And we're going to apply that same style just used a moment ago. Now, the difference here is I want this to blend, this gradient to blend with the texture of the lettering here. Now, if I change the blend mode of my object here, you'll notice it doesn't really do much in the way of blending it. It blends the original pixels, but it's not blending the actual gradient that's being generated by that layer style. So what we need to do is rasterize that layer style. So I'm going to go and just right-click on the layer and choose Rasterize Layer Style. And now I'm going to go ahead and choose, that's what I want is Vivid Light. You can see it gives me a nice, really good glow on there. We'll position that there. Now I'm also going to just kind of scale this in a little bit. I'm holding down Shift Option and then we'll rotate it. So it gives me a little bit more coverage in the area there. Now you see these steps of the gradient that's kind of coming out here. Obviously we don't want that, and that's not really going to be seen anyway. So I'm going to actually generate a mask based on the original shape here. So if you go in the layers panel and command click on that original object, generates a selection, and we'll just add a layer mask based on that selection. And now it isolates that glow effect to the letters. Now I'm going to double click on that layer. Just click on anywhere you want to. Just double click on the layer. And in the blending options here, what I'm going to do is go to the blend if sliders here. And we're going to go to this layer. Or actually, no, we're going to go to the underlying layer. I'm going to hold down the option key. Now, what I want to do here, you'll notice the glow here. It looks good, but it's a little too much. I would expect some of the texturing to really kind of still come through the glow area a little bit. And this is what this is going to be able to do for us. So under underlying layer, hold down the option key, and we're going to just split these sliders apart. And notice we start to bring back some of that texture but still maintain a good amount of that glow. We're blowing out, we're taking all that hot spot basically out of that glow there, and just makes it a little bit more realistic on that texture there. There we go. Now another trick on that bolt, I'm going to actually go ahead and load that as a selection, just command click on it. And if you hit or press Shift Command I, it'll invert the selection, and then hit delete a couple of times. You can kind of shrink down the bolt and make it kind of, you know, conform to the contour there a little bit better. And if we zoom out there, that's looking really good. So we've got this nice glow. It actually looks like that glow is kind of going underneath there, and a lot of the other stuff's looking really good. All right. So now let's start adding some of the background elements in here. Now let's start with I want to have kind of a glow coming in from the bottom here that's generating these hot spots from that are coming from the bottom. And maybe it was an originating point from the bolt like it was in the trailer there. And we're just going to do this very simply. I'm just going to go and create a new layer. And once again, we're going to use that radial gradient with the foreground and the transparent white set as my foreground color. Just drag out a simple gradient like that. And we're going to again use that same style. And this time we're going to take this shape and distort it. So press Command and Control T, and then I'm going to hold down Shift Option and just spread it apart there. And maybe scale it down. Something like that. Just put it just below the edge there. And then I'm going to go over here and get my smudge tool, which is grouped with the blur tool here. Get that. We're still using a soft edge brush here, and you notice I've got my strength here at about 55. And if you just go up just below the edge of the canvas here and just drag up, you'll see it kind of pushes up a little wisp of that shape there. Let me go and give it a little bit more strength here. Let's go up to 65. And if we push that up, and the point being we want to drag it up so it kind of connects with that bolt there, like it just kind of shot up through there. And just, in fact, if you want to get it a little bit straighter, you can hold down the Shift key and just click once, and then go up here and just click once again, and that'll give you maybe do it a couple of times, and you'll get a nice trail going up there. There we go. But now, what I want to do with this shape now is I'm going to go ahead and press Command T, and we're going to right click on it and choose Warp. And now we're going to basically sculpt this so we kind of push the glow down a little bit more, and then have that trail kind of pushing up. So we're basically stretching those pixels and giving it a much more bigger or faster sense of speed. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Now next, I wanted to, let's add some background element here. Now for that, I'm just going to go ahead and do this smoke. I have several images of just plain smoke like this that really come in handy for something like this. And for this one, I'm just going to simply take it and drag and drop it in. And let's position it, of course, bottom of the layer stack, so everything's behind there. Doesn't need to be that bright, so let's go ahead and drop that opacity down to something like 25%. There we go. That really pushes it back in space a good bit more. But I want to give it a color. I just don't want it to be in its natural color. So let's go press Command and Control U to get hue saturation. And I'm going to check on colorize, and let's give it kind of a warm glow here. Maybe increase the saturation a little bit more. Maybe not that much. Yeah, let's drop that back. Maybe darken it a little bit more there. I want it to be very subtle. I don't want it to. I want there to not be anything back there, but just make it very subtle there. That looks pretty good. And now I want to go back to my glow here. It's a little too yellow in that outer glow, so let's go ahead and make that, because we've got nice orange hot spots here, let's make that glow a little bit more orangey. There we go. That's better. Very nice. Okay. So notice as that streak, when we basically distorted those pixels, it's picking up that inner yellow glow there from inside there, and it really adds something to it. Like it really separates it from there. Looks really nice. All right, couple more things. I'm just going to add another blank layer, and remember we've got this light. Remember that white light we had above the text that's giving us those nice highlights there? Well, I want to have a little bit of a haze. If we're suggesting there's smoke or a haze in the scene by the background smoke, we would see a similar thing here in the front. Now to just quick and dirty that, I'm just going to sample the gray here, and let's lighten that up quite a bit. And just as before, we're going to go ahead and add a gradient here. we are on a new layer there. Okay. And we'll just kind of push this up here and stretch it out. Rotate it a little bit. If you want, get a little bit creative, you can warp it. So it's kind of pushing through almost like it's a smoke effect. But we're getting a little bit of a glare coming from whatever light source that is would be in the scene right there, just like that. And finally, something like this always demands, whether it's there or not in the original, I'm going to put it in. We need to add the sparks. Kind of a bonus thing. And this includes a quick little trick for extracting elements like this. I have a library of images like this where I have spark and fire and other things like that on a solid black background. And you want to look for images like this, or if you're going to shoot it on a black background like this. But the reason being, it's easy to extract using channels. If you go into your channels palette, simply command click on the red channel, go back to your layers and press Command J. Copies those selected elements to a new layer. Now go under the layer menu to matting and choose remove black matte. And now you've got nicely extracted sparks. So let's go ahead and drag and drop that over. Just dragging and dropping it over already makes it look cool. All right, so let's scale it down a little bit here. Here's where we're going to get creative once again. And maybe add a little bit of warp to it. Cool thing is that they are sparks. They're, abstract, so you can distort them and bend them to whatever you need them to look like. Into the scene there. Maybe rotate a little bit. One last thing I want to do here is some of the elements of the texture are getting a little bit lost in the background here. And so we're just going to go ahead and select that main layer. And just going to do a quick little dodging on here. Let's set the midtones here, 55, I think that'll do. And let's just kind of, now what I discovered here when I experimented with this, if you go over these highlighted areas, let me zoom in here, you can almost create this feeling of like an inner glow on the text there. You can see that little glow going there. I'm actually going to change this to to shadows. And that way we can get a lot more texture to come through there. So see what I'm doing here is just kind of brushing over and bringing in some of those areas that are just kind of hiding in the dark there. Not too much though. Just want to bring out, more of a hint of it. We can get we got a nice highlight of light here. We can bring that in a little bit more, maybe lighten that up where the glow is a little bit. Just bringing out a little bit more so we can see it. Maybe just brighten up that edge there. Just help define those edges a little bit better. Maybe you'll highlight that glow. But I can sit there and tweak it all day. But there you have it. The Black Adam text effect with a few embellishments of my own. And again, demonstrating how powerful it is working with Photoshop and Dimension. The incredible render capabilities of Dimension combined with being able to create basic 3D shapes in Photoshop can give you some really impressive results in the end. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. A lot more Photoshop and Dimension. There's going to be a lot of new cool stuff coming down the road. I hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you soon.